Many parents, doctors, and educators in North America are alarmed by the widespread psychiatric medicating of children. Family therapist Marilyn Wedge is one of them. She is a therapist who believes parents and families are a vital key and they hold the power to truly resolve their kids' problems. This is the theme of her new book, Suffer the Children, and of her Psychology Today blog often. Wedge has 20 years' experience in marriage and relationship counseling. In her latest book, she builds a strong case against labeling and medication of kids who have psychiatric disorders. It is my pleasure to welcome Marilyn Wedge to Vancouver, to Studio 4, to tell us more.
Thank you, Fanny. It's my pleasure to be here.
Nice to meet you. So, when did it all begin, this over-medication of children?
Well, I started to notice it in the early 90s in my practice. I started noticing that children were coming in already medicated and diagnosed. But it actually, when I looked into the history, it happened well before that, in the 70s and 80s, when the biological model of psychiatry came to replace the Freudian way of thinking.
The biological model.
Right, that is that there's something wrong in the brain or in the child's brain that is causing problems, that is causing a child to act out or feel depressed, some brain problem, rather than other kinds of problems.
And I assume sometimes there is something wrong in the body chemistry or the brain of a child.
Well,
Truly.
I think I actually don't agree with that.
Okay.
I think that's very rare. Of course, if you have diseases that are biologically based, there's Down syndrome, there's diabetes, those things are biologically based. But mental health disorders are mainly relationship disorders. They are about the child's relationship with parents, with teachers, with friends, and also about the parents' relationship with one another.
What is the difference between a behavioral disorder and a psychiatric disorder at an adult level or a teenage level?
Well, if it goes on for a very long time, if a teenager is acting out for a very long time, it can actually become a biological disorder. The brain can be etched with the problem, and it's more difficult to reverse as the teenager grows older. But with a child, you can reverse the problem very quickly. The brain rewires itself. That's what modern neuroscience is telling us.
Okay, so you say in Suffer the Children, a diagnosis is like a bullet.
Yes, it's like a bullet. Paul Watzlawick, one of the early pioneers in family therapy, said words are like bullets. But psychiatric diagnoses are indeed like bullets because it can ruin the course of a child's life. A child gets labeled, medicated. It's very hard to get rid of that label.
And some of the labels are he or she is ADHD,
depressed, bipolar disorder. That is the most recent or disorder of the day, bipolar. More and more children are being diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Early,
yes.
at 6.
At 6, at 3.
Do you
at
think
4.
it doesn't exist, or you can't identify it then, or what are the issues?
I think it's absurd to put that label on children because children so easily can change. If you find the real problem in the child's social environment, mostly the family, and fix that problem, then the disorder doesn't exist in a child.
So basically, if you talk to mom and dad in therapy, and they're concerned about Junior, who was a straight A student,
Right.
and suddenly dropped,
Right.
Now gets D's, acts out,
Right.
doesn't pay attention, perhaps hits his little sister, where do you start?
Okay. I have a case story about that in the book. A little boy named Alex, 5.5 years old, adorable little boy, blonde, curly hair, big blue eyes, and he had a personality change overnight. From being a wonderful student, he started hitting and kicking. He wouldn't mind his teacher. He acted out, and he even hit his mother. So the school said he probably has ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder.
ODD?
ODD, yeah, that's another one that children are being labeled with. They went to the pediatrician, and this pediatrician was a wonderful doctor. He said, look, a 5-year-old child is too young to diagnose and medicate. Go solve your own problems.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Easier said than done, but doable. So they brought Alex in to me, and I talked with the family first, and then I asked to speak with Alex alone. And Alex confided to me that he was very worried about his daddy because his daddy wasn't going to work. And Daddy had a big cast on his arm. The father's profession was he was a pro tennis coach, and he fell on the tennis court and broke his arm. So he was on short-term disability. It was going to heal in about 6 weeks. But meanwhile, little Alex was very scared that Daddy wouldn't go back to work, and he heard Mommy and Daddy arguing about money a bit. So he started to change his behavior. The solution, of course, was to ask the parents not to argue in front of Alex, to reassure Alex that Daddy would be going back to work soon. And actually, the father even took him to the tennis club and introduced him to his friends and the other coaches, so Alex could have a visual image of where Daddy was going back to work. In 2 weeks, Alex was back to normal.
That's quite amazing. Because you would think if your father, your mother was in some kind of trouble as a kid, your natural reaction would be to help, to do better, to maybe think one day I have to earn the money, I better keep up with my schoolwork. But in a sense, often it's the opposite. They feel helpless.
Well, they feel helpless, but in a way, Fanny, they're helping. In a way, Alex was helping in his little mind because he was drawing the attention away from the more serious problem in the family. They were, while Mommy and Daddy had to focus on Alex and meet with the teacher and meet with the therapist, go to the pediatrician, they were taken out of their own troubles, distracted from their own troubles.
As a family therapist, you have often said that the children are the best experts of what is really going on in a family.
That's exactly right. A child will always tell me what the real problem is, whether Mommy and Daddy are fighting about the grandparents, or whether Mommy and Daddy are fighting about money. And of course, you know, they're not tattletaling on their family, they're trying to help. In fact, I say to the child, I'm going to help now. I will be the helper, you don't have to help anymore. And they let me take that burden.
When you talk to parents, how do you get them to reveal to you what is really going on?
They don't. The child does.
Okay. So they keep the doily on the family.
Right. The parents keep the doily. Of course, as we get into it, and I do need to meet with the parents sometimes, and then, you know, we do need to get into the problems. If I could give you another little example, I recently used this in my Huffington Post blog about bullying, because bullying is a big problem these days.
Yes, it is.
And so I had a little boy named Jared, 7 years old, and he was hitting and kicking and biting, and the school was very patient with him because his parents had been divorced recently, so the teacher was very understanding. The mother mostly had the custody, but the parents of the other children were starting to complain, and so the mother needed to take action. So she brought Jared to me. And it turned, and when I talked to Jared alone, I chatted first with the mother and Jared, and then of course I want to get to the root of the problem, I talked to the child. Jared said, Daddy cries every time he drops me off. And I said, why, sweetheart? Why would Daddy cry? And he said, well, because he wants more time with me, and Mommy won't let him. It turned out that the father had very little visitation because of some incidents that had happened early on. And so the father was pretty much cut off from his son. He saw him every other Saturday. That was it. And he was devastated. So I asked the mother if it would be all right with her to bring the father in alone, and the mother said, good luck.
Oh, great. Happy little family.
And I called the father, and the father was amazing. He said, if it's going to help my son, I'll be happy to come in. Because parents will often do something for their child that they wouldn't do for their spouse or ex-spouse.
Sure.
And so in resolving this, I needed to get the parents to a more civilized level of discourse. and to get more visitation for the father, which I was able to do.
Sure, but as you know, what we value, we often put on our kids. When you were speaking of bipolar child, you think of somebody like Huck Finn in fiction. He was a bit, headstrong, free-spirited, naughty.
Lied.
Lied.
Didn't go to school,
exactly.
cut school.
Would he have been considered bipolar today, do you think, or manic depressive, or
Fanny,
ADD?
there's no doubt. I think Huck Finn would have had every diagnosis in the book. Definitely ODD, definitely ADHD, because he never went to school and he'd lie about it when he got home. Definitely bipolar. I mean, he did crazy things. He cavorted with a runaway slave.
Sure, but where is the line? Because there are children who cannot be helped by changing dynamics in the family. There are some. In extreme cases. You don't agree?
I don't agree, no.
Really?
Even with cases
no matter
of abuse.
What about an autistic child or...
Well, if you get the child before the child is labeled. If you get a child, like I have an example in the book of a 2-year-old girl. We never used the word autistic. In fact, the girl was referred for behavior problems and a speech delay. And I met with the family, lovely people, lovely girl, but she was a bit wild. She kind of pulled all the toys off my toy shelves. I called the pediatrician. I said, "Are you worried about autism?" And he said, "Don't use that word because both of the parents are doctors. Let's treat it as a behavior problem and a speech delay." And that is what we did. I worked with the parents to get Brianna's, that was her name, Brianna, to get her behavior under control. And we worked with a speech therapist to take care of the speech. And she turned out to be fine.
When we come back, let's talk about, and I know it's another label, but children without a conscience. And perhaps all kids have a conscience, I don't know. But if you grow up to be a Ted Bundy or a Son of Sam, there's something missing there. And we'll talk about that, like to identify, not to identify, to medicate, not to medicate. Marilyn Wedge, our guest, suffered the children, her new book.